Morning, everybody. Tom Waits. If you don't love Tom Waits, you're missing out. Tom Waits is a special jazz-inflected singer-songwriter who actually has a lot of edge to some of his albums. The first three are kind of more middle of the road. The first two singer-songwriter albums are just great songwriting. Unbelievable tracks on those first two records. And then Nighthawks of the Diner has a lot of it's a live record, and its instrumentation is jazz behind him. And he's kind of this beatnik lyricist that's, if you don't know Tom Waits, you should really dig into those albums. And then he follows up those first three with Foreign Affair, Small Change, Heart Attack and Vine, Blue Valentines. Those late 70s records are just outstanding. A little bit more production. Some, again, real jazzy aspects to it. Again, the lyrics are just fantastic. If you don't believe me, listen to The Piano Has Been Drinking, not me. He cracks me up, man. He says some things that you gotta hear him three times. You're like, oh my goodness. In the land of the one eye, the land of the blind, the one eye is king. That kind of stuff he says. Postcard from Hooker, Minneapolis, one of my favorite songs ever. She has this whole postcard message about how things are going, and by the end of it, it's all bullshit, and she just wants to borrow some money because she wants to get high, but that's the real grit, true, honest story of life in America, whether it's the 60s, the 70s, the 90s, the 2000s. People still overdosing today. They're just looking for more powerful stuff. Fentanyl takes them out quick. Today's generation of kids, all their big pop stars are all dead. Juice WRLD, Mac Miller, Extentation, however you say that, I don't even know. Not a big fan. Lil Peep, those guys all just didn't even bother making it to 25. But the lyrics, a lot of those guys are so commenting on depression and pills, and it's amazing some of the things that Juice WRLD, who's fairly popular, just talking to my psychiatrist kind of lyric that he has about how if I don't take these pills I'm going to die, but if I keep taking them I'm probably going to die. It's not exactly fun. His sampling of the Sting song Shape of My Heart gives me a real kind of connection with the kids. I can play the Sting and then drop that song and they're like, oh shit, cool, but Tom Waits is an essential. He's one of those cats that you'll kind of not grow old with. And into the 80s, he really kind of deviates even crazier, with some of those records he does in the 80s, Frank's Wild Years and Swordfish Trombones. Like there's some avant-garde in those records. And then, of course, he's still making records. He's still doing interesting stuff. Mule Variations, the one I just listened to the other day from like 4 or 5 years ago, outstanding. I can't think of the name of it right now. I can't think of it. But big Tom Waits guy. And if you don't know Tom Waits, you should. What I'm going to do today is just kind of update you on some recent purchases I've made. I've not been buying a lot. Money's tight. We're working on the cafe. My wife's income is small right now. I'm back to work. And so some of what I'm buying is actually 45s for work. I like having 45s. I expanded my 45 box that I bring. It allows me to know I have certain soul songs, certain old classic, songs that just I need to have every time without having to fill my crates with the LPs all the time. There's a lot of songs that I'm only going to play one or two, Julie London or Peggy Lee or whatever songs from that record, Nancy Sinatra. I'm only going to play one or two songs from any of her records. So if I have a 45 or two with me from a lot of these artists, a lot of the great soul songs, if I have the 45s, I don't have to bring as many of the LPs. So I've been buying a lot of 45s, which is fun. And it's got a real wow factor for, kids who come in like, oh my goodness. And even old folks are like, oh, nostalgic about it. But I want to update you on some of the recent jazz purchases I've got. And like I said, I've not been buying a lot. And this covers probably about a month plus of purchasing. It's a pretty slow month for me. When I'm in a buying craze, I can buy hundreds of records in a month or so. This is probably maybe 25, 30 records. I'm going to start with some New York stuff. I've almost completed most of the New York labels from the era that I care about. I don't care about the later artsy fartsy stuff, not necessarily most as you know. And the early stuff isn't on LP the same way. It's been culled together on LPs, and I'll buy the stuff by the artists I love. I got a ton of old Basie, a ton of old Billy, a ton of old Ellington, but most of my focus is on the great jazz labels of the 50s and the mid 60s. I just love that era of jazz. Anybody who's watched the channel for any length knows that. So what I'm picking up now is just random pieces. There's a few labels I'm still plugging stuff in. Verve has such a big catalog. I have most of the later Creed Taylor era stuff filled in because it was loungy, and I was able to use it for my jazz, for my DJ sets a lot. Although I'm not playing much of it nowadays, but so Verve still has some earlier stuff from that first 400, more of the Norman Granz era stuff. There's a lot of that, and I'm probably about 2/3 of the way through collecting that. And it's kind of convoluted because some of that stuff came out on Norgran first, some of it came out on Clef first, some of it was actually licensed to Mercury first, and then somehow he actually re-releases most of it under the Verve title. And it's pretty easy to end up with the same stuff with 2 different covers, 2 different labels, but Norman Granz directing it. And you're like, oh man, I already had this on Clef, crap. I already had this on Verve, poop. But it's alright. Sometimes you just want to fill that space in anyway. It helps you understand how these labels worked and operated sometimes. Speaking of that, I'm going to start off with this guy. I've always had this music, but I've never had this cover. I've always wanted the cover. Sadly, there's a little damage there. I always had the version that came out in the 7200s, Place for Bird. It's got the same colors, but it's just like a black and a brown strip with his face. I think he has the mohawk going on. It was simply Prestige repackaging this record 5 or 6 years later because Rollins was going on to bigger things elsewhere, so they repackaged this. It was still called Place for Bird. I think it was like 7296 or 73, or maybe it was like a 7400, but I think it's 72 something. But I've also wanted the original art, and I've had the later ones slotted into the 7095 slot, but I always want to get the original of this eventually, and they often go for hundreds of bucks. So I've always kind of been like, well, I'll just wait until one drops my lap for a good price. In fact, I was okay with actually buying just the jacket with a beat up record if the price was right, just to slot it in there, to have the actual art covered, and then I could still listen to the later issue of it if I wanted. However, I found this one, kind of an interesting story. Some guy in Discogs had this for sale 5-6 months ago, and he had to make an offer on it, and it said poor. I'm like, well, shit. You know, I think he wanted 25 initially, so I offered him 20. And his response was, oh, I wasn't supposed to make an offer on it. And before I could even respond to it, he had taken it down. But then the exact same record was relisted from a different seller, which I think was still him, almost 100%. Same condition, and this time it was marked up to 40 bucks. And no more make an offer. And I was like, that's... And that other version didn't exist when the first version was still up. I had looked through all. So one disappeared, then it reappeared, higher price point. Probably the same seller, but 2 different stores. And so I let it go. I'm like, I'm not paying 40 bucks for something that's fair, or, you know, even poor. And cover or no cover, I'm paying 40 bucks for it. So I waited, and I kind of kept an eye on this record. A few other times it came available in some conditions. And I'm like, it's gone too high. I'm not going to worry about it. I still have the music. And then finally I looked again on Discogs last week, and this guy still had it. And I offered him 20 bucks for it, which was my original offer. I'm like, hey, I offered you 20 bucks for this 6 months ago. I really take that 20 bucks now. And he was. He's like, okay, yeah, fair enough. I'll give it to you for 20. So I gave it a good cleaning. And this is probably a very good minus. I gave it a real in-depth cleaning, spent a lot of time on it, and it's got a few hicks and bumps, but honestly it plays pretty darn well. These old records, especially from the 50s, you talk about the deep groove, which is often just that little groove inside the label, but a lot of these records have deep grooves themselves. It was heavy, thick vinyl. The actual sound is deep in the record. And so a lot of that surface stuff just doesn't really show up, especially if you don't mind a little crackle of the fireplace in the background from your record. Like I said, this plays remarkably well, all things considered. So now I have 7095 with the red cover. I can slot it into my 600 Prestige records and put the 7296 or whatever it is back where it goes. And that's what kind of a completist I am. Again, I'm not going to buy the $200 copy. It's just not how I operate. There's too much good music out there to spend $200 on one thing. It's got to be pretty rare and pretty high on my demand list for that ever to be the case. So Prestige-wise, this is also a reissuing. This is the Converse now. I've always had the original of this, which was early in the 7000 series. And then Prestige, when Getz was being popular, probably at Verve, 63-ish, 74, 34, Prestige reissued some of the early Getz stuff. And it's easy to already buy this twice, because again, this was issued back in, I think initially on 10-inch, and then early in the 7000 series it got issued again. And now here's it getting issued by Prestige for a third time. And as a collector, there's nothing really on that to say, oh, that's that earlier stuff. It says Jazz Classics. And does it even make it clear back here? This album was formerly available as Early Stand, Prestige 7255. So, and yeah, I think even that is a reissue of something earlier as well. So, it's Prestige is tricky. And this is a record I can't tell you much about. I haven't listened to it yet. But it's called First Prize by Eddie Daniels, 7506, which puts it probably 65, 66. I'm gonna guess 67, so even later than I thought. Again, I don't really know much about Eddie Daniels, to be honest, but I was bought from a seller. This was listed for a decent price. It's a Prestige title I didn't have, so I grabbed it, and I'll probably tell you more about that when I get around to listening to it. My friend Jean-Michel was offering to bid on a few records for me a few weeks ago while I was at work DJing, and his brother ended up showing up, and I ended up not getting a bid in because things came up, and that's how life operates, you know, no big deal. But this Mildred Bailey record I've always wanted on Regent was went for like $20. I was like, ah, man, $24. That's I love Regent stuff. Mildred Bailey, if I recall or remember right, was Native American. And she was a great early kind of blues R&B singer that is kind of largely forgotten about. I couldn't find another copy anywhere for a decent price, but Regent always reissues their stuff with different covers, just like Sad Boy being sister labels. And so this is the same record with a little bit of a later cover. I actually like this cover a lot. It's got some gritty, I'm thinking that's New York, but I'm not positive. But it's got a great gritty look to it. It's the same music. Probably, I think this stuff was recorded in the 40s, maybe the 50s, but I think it's the 40s, maybe even earlier. But Regent reissues it here for the second time, and I got this for a good price as well. So Jean-Michel, no damage done. I got the music. I can cross that off my list. Another interesting story was this Ron L. Bright record. I talked about Ron Albright on one of his Regent records a few episodes back. Ron Albright was a great piano player. He accompanied a lot of the greats, yet kind of went unheralded. I didn't do a lot as a leader. His stuff as a leader was on kind of smaller labels that didn't get him a lot of recognition. Regent and Vanguard being his other one. And I bought this on eBay probably 3-4 weeks ago. And I waited and I waited and I waited. Finally it showed up, and it was the wrong record. It was actually a Marlena Shaw record, which I didn't have. And the guy didn't know what happened to the Ron Albright record, so he let me keep the Marlena Shaw record, which was a decent trade-off for me. But I still wanted this, so I went on eBay and I found another one. The guy wanted like $40 for it. I offered him $25. He took it, and that's how this kind of works. A Ron Albright record on Vanguard that's even in pretty decent shape, spines legible. You know, it's got a decent, nice, beautiful. The Vanguard label is gorgeous too. That color. It might be a $40 record, but the demand for Ron Albright is so small. I was probably the first guy that even nibbled at it. So I got 25. I've had the listed for 6 months to a year. Yeah, I'll take 25. So that's kind of how it operates, man. Always think about what you're looking at, how much demand is there for that. That always should impact what you pay. There can be as rare as snot, but if nobody wants it, nobody knows about it, it can only be so collectible. 2 records I've been looking for a long time. They were on my Discogs watch list forever, and I was surprised they were so hard to find. Were by the great clarinetist Jimmy Hamilton. They were both on the Urania label, which is a label I'm going to cover in an episode coming up pretty soon. I got a lot of small labels I want to talk about. The trouble is no one really watches those episodes in comparison to if I talk Tone Poet, 2,000 views right away. If I talk about some small little label like Storyville, 600 views. I'm like, oh man. Which to me is weird because those little small labels have a lot to offer, and a lot of those records will be coming at you at a great price. But Hamilton was a great player, and there's some great lineups on this. Oscar Pettiford's on this one, I believe, with Barry Galbraith, if I remember. Yep, and Sidney Gross is on the guitar as well. Galbraith, Jimmy Hamilton, O.C. Johnson, and Clark Terry shows up on the trumpet. Great stuff. Urania is a great little New York label. It's a great picture of Manhattan. Always loved the New York atmosphere and vibe. Nothing says jazz quite like Manhattan at dark. And then this one has a great cover. Shows him looking at the piano, I think, with his clarinet sitting there. And of course, most guys compose at the piano. There's just more you can do there. This has some great players on as well. Some of them of Ellington fame, like Sam Woodyard. And of course, Jimmy played with Ellington for a long time. Oscar Pettiford's on some of this as well. Ernie Royal, Lucky Thompson's on some of this. The Lucky Thompson record on Urania is outstanding. Earl Knight, Jimmy Hamilton, Sidney Gross, Kenny Kersey. So some great players are on both these Urania sessions. And Urania is a great little label. The Coleman Hawkins stuff is outstanding on there. I like pretty much all the stuff I've collected on Urania, and it's probably less than 20 titles. What we're listening to right now is the great Tal Farlow. And Tal is such a great player. He goes back to the early 50s with Norman Granz, so some of the stuff comes out of Norgran and Clef. I think Norgran. It's weird how they distribute the titles. Clef is older than Norgran. Norgran came like 53. And some guys seem to be more on Norgran than Clef, and of course they all end up on Verve together. How they decided what was where, there's no real clear definition in sound or style from what I can tell. But Farlow's a great player. He had these giant hands. I think they called him Octopus, if memory serves. Big giant hands, and he could play chords and structures on the guitar that most guys just can't. And he's got a real beautiful tone. Nice percussive touch. I mean, really enunciated, very fluid. He seems to be full of ideas. He's like, oh, I can go that way, I can go this way, I can go that way. And that's one of the fun things about jazz, is if you have ideas, if you're one of those guys, jazz will be a vehicle for you to do that. I think the lineup here is fairly simple. I think Ray Brown's on it. Red Mitchell, Stan Levy, and Claude Williamson. And you guys know I'm a big Claude Williamson fan on the piano. That guy's outstanding. Fantastic early Verve, 8011. I think it's the first 8000 series I didn't have at this point. I have most of the first 25 or so, and then it kind of spreads out a little bit. I'm missing some stuff, but early Verve stuff I'll be collecting for some time. My guess is there's just so much of it. You know, there's the 800 series, the 8000 series alone has 800 titles. They skip some numbers, so it's probably more like 700 titles. Then the 4000 Ella Fitzgerald series has 100 titles. There's a 2000 series that has a bunch of stuff that was a little bit more vocal, but it wasn't really clearly defined. And a lot of 8000 stuff gets issued in the 2000s, and conversely, and with the Clef and the Norgran stuff, I would estimate there's probably 1,000 Verve records to collect by a lot of the jazz giants of the 40s and the 50s and into the 60s, of course, when Creed Taylor 180s the label in a whole different direction. And a lot of that stuff has a lot of value too. It's more coffee table jazz, so we can sit in our little small ranch home in the suburbs. We parked our station wagon. Let's put that Cal Tjader Warm Wave on so we can be really cool, Ma. Let's hip it, hop it, and be really hipsters with our grass skirts and dance to some Walter Wanderley. Like it's much different stuff, much poppier, much more commercially. I won't say viable, but much more commercially designed. And it's stuff you can play at your average office party, and everyone's gonna be like, "I'm so cool. I don't even know why I'm so cool right now. And of course, the Stan Getz, Bossa Nova, all that stuff is a big part of that. There's some great Bill Evans stuff, some Jimmy Smith stuff, some Wes Montgomery stuff. So there is still great jazz being made under Creed Taylor at Verve, but it's a different beast for sure. But early Verve right there. This is a Clef record. Great artist. I think this is a David Stone Martin. It is. It's a Lionel Hampton quintet. It's number Clef, number 642. And I think it starts at 600 Clef. So it's pretty early on the Clef sequence. Nice trumpeter label, which of course transcends to the early Verve stuff as well. I don't think they list the band, but as you know, well, they are showing it. Buddy Rich is there. Looks like Oscar Peterson's there. Looks like, well, there's Lionel. Probably Ray Brown. Yeah, it's Oscar, Buddy DeFranco, Ray Brown, and Buddy Rich. Some great little photos in the back of that, actually. Nice stuff. So Lionel Hampton, for those who don't really appreciate early giants like Lionel, he plays with Benny Goodman in the late 30s as Goodman's breaking the race barrier by bringing him and Teddy Wilson into the band. And Goodman recognized the brilliance, the genius of both Teddy Wilson and Lionel Hampton, regardless of what color they were. Those guys could swing and had a high level of virtuosity that was just so impressive. And virtuosity is only as good as, can you make it swing? Can you make it be melodic? Can you make it be memorable? You know, and that's where Hampton's just a giant. And Hampton also, as I discovered doing some research the last couple of years, he is responsible for one of the great jazz universities, like Art Blakey. This guy had so many of the greats come through his groups. He was a real training ground for a lot of the young black musicians, and so many of them spent some time in Lionel Hampton's orchestras and bands. A guy that definitely deserves more recognition today than he gets, and more love from collectors today than he gets. This is a fantastic Lester Young record. I listened to this yesterday. Lester's All was a revelation. Just one of the most beautiful players. He has that tenor off to the side, and he twists his mouthpiece so he can play it out this way. He's got his pork pie hat. Lester's a character. He's a flirt. He's always got a little pinch and a little whisper in the ear. He's playing here with John Lewis of Modern Jazz Quartet fame, Buddy Rich, Ray Brown, and Gene Ramey. So a great lineup. This is a Japanese reissue of this, thus the 2672 number on it. Originally came out on Norgrand 1072, and then it was also issued in the Verve sequence at 8162. So that shows you, like, some of these classic sessions by these guys will have multiple iterations. I think they all have the same cover at least, which helps you avoid some confusion. When they switch the covers up on each release, it's like, come on, guys, it's too much to try to grasp it all. Oh, this is a great Charlie Ventura record. I'm a big Charlie Ventura fan. 8163. In a jazz mood. Ventura was a great little player. I think he was from Philadelphia, if memory serves me correctly. But again, Norman Granz had a real lock on a lot of the great talent of that era. And Ventura deserves a little more credit than he gets as well. And this is some Buddy DeFranco stuff, issued in Japan, I think in like 79 or 80, Verve 2632. In that 2000 sequence, again, it's a bit of a confusing sequence. There does seem to be stuff from that 2000 sequence from the 50s and 60s, but there also seems to be a lot of stuff that was added into the 2000 sequence later on. Again, I think this is a David Stone Martin cover. Great album cover. Great band. Great Verve, Norman Granz. And so that completes most of what I've gotten from the New York labels as of late. Now we're going to dive into Chicago. And we're going to start with this. My friend Scott Baldwin posted this the other day, and I didn't have this. In part because it's on Checker. And Checker is a side label of Argo, which Argo is a side label of Chess. And you can tell by the font. I knew right away I knew Checker already was a kind of a rock soul side of Chess and Argo. And Chess, of course, was the blues. Argo was more of the jazz. and even Argo has two sequences, the 600 and the 4000, which are somewhat different. The 4000 being more poppy and vocal, the 600 being more straightforward jazz. But Checker was always more kind of early rock and roll, R&B. This has the great Tab Smith on it. Tab Smith, of course, he's the leader here. Played with Basie for a while. A real early Illinois Jack Cat. What's his name? The guy who Coltrane played with a little bit out of Philly on King label. Slips of my tongue. Earl Bostic. He's got a lot of Earl Bostic kind of sound. Sam the Man Taylor. It's that kind of vein where it's jazz with a lot of blues and R&B, early rock and roll. These recordings, I think, come from the early 40s. And Because of You, which I think this was actually a big hit. And yet Tab Smith is pretty forgotten about today. Great album cover on the Checker label, part of the Chess family. And it's prototypical Chicago black music. And Chicago is such a center for the black community in the 50s and 60s. You know, probably only Detroit maybe had more African Americans than Chicago. And so there was so much talent. And Chicago and Detroit both also had black universities and black high-level education high schools with music programs. Those things impact how black kids turn out. Black schools do create opportunity for black kids. You know, there can't be any mincing of those words. We should never imagine that the decay of the urban inner city school hasn't been super detrimental to the black community. You know, it's very interwoven. And in the 50s and 60s, there was an effort on the black community to try to create urban schools that had quality educational opportunities, and music programs and the arts were of a great value to these young men and women. And it's sad to see how much we fight the progress that our minority groups make and need to retain that gap between black and white, because no matter how bad we have it as white people, and it's something the president said, I think it was LBJ, if we can still look down on the blacks, we'll never feel too bad about our own lot in life, because we can still be condescending and just be judgmental, and it allows the economic situation to maintain itself, and the divide has to be in place. And so upward mobility of the black community is an obstacle to the dominance of the elite's wealth. And that's not a white and black thing. They just play it out in race. You know, the elite come in all shapes and colors. It just happens to be that they're mostly white today, but it's not necessarily a white thing. In this days and age, the money really comes to those who invented the gunpowder. And again, we're going to move on, but so the black community, the schooling that was available in Chicago and Detroit really does create a lot of great musicians. And Detroit was one of the great jazz schools that put out so many great musicians, and Chicago was right on their heels. So Chess, Argo, the Chess brothers, Phil and Leonard, have an awful reputation as being really awful human beings and really treated their black musicians poorly. But as my friend Scott Baldwin said, they treated their white musicians not a whole lot better. So they were equal opportunity assholes, at least. So you gotta love Tab Smith and this early R&B, soul, rock and roll, jazz, blues. It's just so crazy how much these sounds are so immersed into each other. They all kind of come out of the same thing, and the differences are so minute at times between what R&B is versus what blues is, what jazz is, what soul is. It's all what rock and roll is. Early rock and roll was pretty much R&B, and then rock and roll becomes more codified and it starts to switch up. And of course, even the Beatles and Stones were doing that black R&B music, and we needed to separate race again. and so rock becomes more of a white thing into the 60s and 70s, and R&B becomes a separate thing. And whenever the charts get too racially intermingled, someone will come along and make sure that's no longer the case, because intermingled music charts mean intermingled sexual relationships, and that's also a big problem for the white male in America. I think I showed you this already once, but I'm going to show it to you again. This is the great guitar player Bill Jennings, with some great records on Prestige. He's a great sideman at Prestige throughout the 60s. He's got some early work at King. This is a King side label audio lab of a really early, probably 53 recording of Bill Jennings. I think does this have, I don't see who the band is on this. I think this has Leo Parker, but I'm not sure. It could be the other one. Him and Leo Parker do some stuff together. But great stuff. And I had to show you this because it's part of the Chicago thing, and it fits in here. Also on Argo, I mentioned I got you that Marlene Shaw. This is her first record. And I've always dug Marlene Shaw, but most of the stuff I have on her is on collections, compilations. The Blue Note Trip series has a couple of her tracks on there I really love. Her version of the I Feel Like Making Love is just outstanding. Of course, her song California Soul is also a classic. But I got this sent to me by mistake. It's a great early Marlene Shaw record. It's her first. Then she goes to Blue Note and does 3 or 4 records there in the 70s. This is probably 68 or so. Great cover. Beautiful young black woman. And then she follows that up shortly after with the Spice of Life record, which has the California Soul song, which is pretty famous. The Northern Soul collectors go nuts for that song. The 45 can cost hundreds of dollars. But this record's not that hard to find, actually. And it's got a second cover as well from the 70s. So Marlene Shaw is worth looking for. She's a great bluesy, soul-filled black R&B singer that bottles up that Chicago sound wonderfully. And then also Scott Baldwin, thanks again. He posted this the other day, and I was like, oh, I've never seen that before. And this is VSOP Mercury Records, and it's pretty much all Emersy stuff. It's all unreleased material that's unreleased from the jazz era, including a fantastic little Clifford Brown 7-inch. I mean, how cool is that? And here's the crazy thing. People talk about jazz has gotten so expensive. This cost me $20. And there's Clifford Brown in there, you know, unissued Clifford Brown at that. $20 for that. What a great deal. I got the Tab Smith, Scott, and this, who both of them you were talking about with me last week, from the same seller, which I think is a fairly wild thing. It's a 4-record set. It probably came out in the late 80s, I'm guessing. A lot of this is in Japanese and in English. Leonard Feathered wrote the intro here. And unfortunately, a lot of those tracks, they list the artist in Japanese. I haven't got around to listening to this yet. It just came the other day. They do show the entire Emersy discography there. That's pretty cool. Sorry, I should have looked at this a little sooner. Some great photographs. A ton of Japanese text that I cannot read. But we got Billy Taylor, we have Art Farmer, we have Roland Kirk, Quincy Jones, Cannonball Adderley, Maynard Ferguson, Herb Geller, Clifford Brown, Helen Merrill, Paul Bly, Paul Kinneshay, Junior Mance, Clark Terry, Arnett Cobb, Jay McShann, Errol Garner, Gene Ammons, Bob James Trio, which is probably pretty early, 62, wow. It's pretty impressive, some of the artists on here. So, cool 4 LP box set that I'm looking forward to digging into. And this is out there. It's on Discogs now for $20-30. Classic West Coast, wonderful stuff. Now we're going to move on to the West Coast. And I think I might have showed you this already too, but this is West Coast stuff. This is Oscar Pettiford with the great bass player Harry Mabison, who they're both playing cello on this. And it's really fantastic hearing the cello sound like a guitar. And there's also a bass player, a drummer, and a piano player, with 2 cellos being the lead instruments changing back and forth. pretty unique stuff. It was recorded originally for Richard Bach at Pacific, who passed on it for unknown reasons. And Von Babbitt, Harry's son, told me this. And so Imperial puts it out. And it's a great little 7-inch. I don't think it's available in any other way that I know of. I'm sure it made it on some collection at some point, but that's a cool little piece. Had to show you that again if I hadn't already. Now, some more West Coast stuff I want to show you here real quick. Fantasy, a couple titles. These came in an auction last week before, and most everything else I wanted went too high, but these both slipped through the cracks to me. Gus Mancuso, who plays the baritone, which is a horn kind of between the trombone and the tuba. Real low end baritone range, obviously. And some great players are on this. Eugene Wright, Jerry Wiggins, Cal Jader, Richie Kamuka, Vince Guaraldi, Eddie Duran. Like, some serious players are on that record. And it's beautiful red fantasy vinyl. Early in the discography, 32, 33. So 3200's where they start. So that's pretty early stuff for fantasy. Next, I got a great Montgomery Brothers record on fantasy. I think this one's from 1960 or so, 3308. It was 108 titles into the fantasy release. Again, it still comes on the beautiful red vinyl, and he's about to get out to I think he's actually already gone on the East Coast. He's starting to record for Riverside at this point, but Fantasy puts this great session out, and somehow I kind of ignored his earlier work with his brothers to some degree. I had the Master Sound stuff, but when I printed out my Wes Montgomery sheet for my binder, I kind of missed, because they did the Riverside stuff and the Verve stuff, then he passes away. And for some reason at the end of that on Wikipedia, they list the stuff with his brothers. And I didn't print that page out for some reason. So I missed a lot of his earlier work with his brothers, aside from the Master Sound stuff, which I had. But he does make that record out Fantasy, and he makes 3 records with his brothers at Pacific. This is 1240, probably 1956 or 57. This is with 5 other people, and there's some pretty serious talent on this record. Freddie Hubbard, Pookie Johnson, Joe Bradley, Wayman Punchy Atkinson. Great stuff. Young Freddie Hubbard, by the way. Then he follows that up here with P5. So probably 1960, 59, early in the second sequence. This has the Montgomery Brothers with Tony Basil, Louis Hayes, Pony Poindexter, and Harold Land shows up on this one. Fantastic Harold Land. This will be after the Clifford Brown years. And then this is P17. And this comes out not long after that. Wes, Buddy, and Monk Montgomery featuring Harold Land and Freddie Hubbard. Great little photo on the train tracks there. So that's his stuff with his brothers on Pacific and Fantasy. And those are albums that I probably should have had a long time ago. Those 3 records can be a little bit more expensive than your average Pacific title. This is Earl Andurza. And Earl Andurza, talk about being a bright, edgy player like Jackie McLean with that kind of sharp sound. He's a very agitated, bright player. There's some hints of free and avant-garde on some of this. It really is propulsed, up-tempo stuff, really bright, really brilliant. Got some edge to it, no question. Jack Wilson is on the piano, a fantastic player who was a big part of the West Coast scene for quite a while. And then Bumblebee Slim, fantastic blues jazz player. Again, great players were on this: Les McCann, Richard Holmes, The Groove Man, Curtis Amy, Ron Jefferson, Leroy Vinegar, and Joe Pass. That's pretty high level stuff right there, playing along with the great Bumblebee Slim. So that's the West Coast stuff. Now a few major label pieces I'm going to show you. Sinatra and Basie. I never had this one. I had, of course, the second and third one, the Live in the Sands, the one with Fly Me to the Moon. You gotta love Basie and Sinatra together. Sinatra was a big fan of Count Basie and recognized that nobody swings like Count Basie. And so when he starts his own label, Reprise, Frank, he starts working with Sinatra and with Basie, and their work together is outstanding. And you gotta love Basie in any context, all the time, every day. My friend Jean-Michel recommended this to me. I always kind of pass this up. Not a big fan of the cover. Columbia does some weird covers at times. But there's no questioning the talent on this with Ben Webster and Sweets Edison, Hank Jones, George Duvivier, Clarence Johnson. This goes back to what I was talking about Billie Holiday last month and how Ben and Sweets are so wonderful together. He's like, do you have that one they did on Columbia? I'm like, no, I don't. I've always passed that up. I had to actually look it up, so I'm like, I don't remember. And I just passed that cover over because it just looks like a posthumous collection, not a brand new release or something. And boy, fantastic stuff. Thank you, Jean-Michel, on that one. Some people do advise me on stuff to buy all the time when I don't have it, which isn't every day, but this is the great Bunk Johnson. Fantastic player. This is on Columbia very early. Number 520. So that puts it pretty early in the Columbia sequence, which starts at 500 as well. And it's got a black Columbia label, not something you see a lot of. The Last Testament of a Great Jazzman. Fantastic. Beautiful old Columbia. And then Jack Montrose, a great player. This is a cool cover as well. The horns full. Red Norvo on RCA. A little schmaltzier. Of course, that's RCA's how they operate. You know, RCA is not going to be doing the deep stuff, the heavy stuff very often. They're not going to be doing the racially challenged stuff very often. RCA is a little bit more conservative, like Capitol, with who they record and when. Red Norvo, Jack Montrose, Jim Hall, love him on guitar. The great Max Bennett's on the bass, and Bill Dolney on the drums, who I'm not that familiar with. Fantastic album cover, RCA Jazz. Last I'm going to show you is Dizzy Gillespie record on the Riviera's on the Philips label. This is an import pressing. Well, actually, it looks like a domestic pressing. It's Chicago, yep. But Philips was a French label associated with, oh, so I tip my tongue. There's two formats for the Fontana, maybe, is it the other aspect of this? But Gillespie does 3 or 4 records for Philips in the early 60s, and they're good records. Dizzy was more appreciated in Europe than he ever was in America, which I think is kind of sad. Now I'm going to show you a few 10 inches I got. I showed you guys recently, about a month ago, the story of George Wein, Storyville, Boston, all that great stuff, the 10 inches. And I said there's only a few 10 inches I didn't have. One was a Serge Chaloff record with Boots Wazuli, and there was these 2 Sidney Bechet 10 inches, which I hadn't gotten yet. I was waiting to find them at a good price. And I happened to find this one, Volume 1, for a good price on eBay. And so I think it was 20-25 bucks. I bought it. And I looked on eBay, and this one was available for 40 or make an offer. I offered them 25. I actually got them both on the same day for like 20-25 bucks a piece. And they both showed up on the same day in the mail from 2 different sellers, which that's kind of cool. So these are 2 of the last Storyvilles I don't have. And I actually finally bought the Serge Chaloff record out of Japan. It's going to probably take a month to get here, I'm guessing, but fantastic Sidney Bechet. Bechet is one of the bright, early innovators of improvisation. Bechet is one of those guys, like an Armstrong, who really kind of sets the table for what jazz is going to be. And he's a frenetic, hectic, intense player, just like he is a frenetic, intense, hectic person. And it's not very common where your playing isn't a direct reflection of your personality. It's not very often. There's probably some guys out there who play different than who they are. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Miles plays like an acerbic little jerk. That's how he sounds all the time. Coltrane plays like a sincere spiritual monk. That's how Coltrane sounds all the time. Mobley plays like a cool cat. That's how Mobley sounds all the time. Milt Jackson plays like a guy from Detroit with the blues. That's how Milt plays all the time. It's pretty hard to not play how you are, how you see the world, how you interact with the world, how you respond to all the things that happen to you. That's going to come out in your playing. That's why jazz is such an interesting thing. Any other kind of music, you're playing what's written. And there's no room for your impact on the music to be shown. You sing what's written, you play what's written, you play the song as the writer of the song intended for it to be. Jazz says, I don't care what the intent of the song was. This is how I feel about me and my place in the world right now. I can only play where I'm coming from. Can't fake it. So I was pretty happy to get those two Sidney Bechet records. And last, I picked these all up pretty cheap. I'll just show them to you. Nellie Lutcher on Capitol. Can't tell you too much about her yet, honestly. John Gross on French Horn on the Trend label. An early 10-inch on the Trend label. Great stuff. Trend does some pretty cool stuff on the West Coast. This is on Norgran, The Six, a cool little group that you don't hear much about. Count Basie, this is on Mercury if I recall, probably licensed from Norman Granz. I buy anything Basie I can find nowadays. And then this is some Stan Kenton, early on Stan Kenton. And again, Kenton was one of the real training grounds for the white players. You know, between Woody Herman and Stan Kenton, those orchestras have most of the great white jazz cats of the 50s and 60s went through those orchestras. So that's what I've collected lately. I got some more stuff showing up in the mail. I'll probably eventually show that stuff to you too as it shows up. And like I haven't been collecting like I was. It's much more just a few things here, a few things there. I'm not walking around the record store with 12 boxes or anything like that right now. It's 1 or 2 boxes a week. Maybe if I get lucky on a good day on Monday, I might get 3, you know. And I'm okay with that because I'm in a place where I'm pretty content with my collection. I have most of the chapters that I want to fill out filled out. You know, most of the big New York labels are pretty much wrapped up. Most of the Chicago labels are pretty wrapped up. Most of the West Coast labels, I'm slowly filling in those missing Pacific and Contemporary and Fantasy. Most of those small micro labels I've talked about, I've finished most of those off. Verve is the one where there's the most pieces missing. And then, of course, I'm starting to buy some stuff like Concord and some of those labels from the 70s and 80s that made kind of straightforward, blues-driven, traditional jazz. And a lot of that stuff sounds so great. The Gene Harris, Ray Brown, it's recorded brilliantly. These guys are, of course, in a bit of a better place financially, spiritually, emotionally. And so they're playing with a bit more comfort in their life. And so they're playing kind of a bit more relaxed and beautifully, which there's room for that in my listening. I can listen to something that's not always intense and on the edge, you know. But there's a difference in the tone even of a Lockjaw Davis playing in 1949 in the face of Jim Crow and all the segregation. And he can be playing a blues that's kind of straightforward. But then I can listen to some blues played on in the 80s that's got a similar approach to the music, but the emotional context of the players is very different because of the different setting that those decades represent. And it's not like Black Oppression dies in the 70s and 80s, by no means, but it's certainly better than it was in the 40s and 50s. So I'm going to leave it on that note. Some fun titles, nothing earth-shatteringly great. You know, the Rollins records are pretty cool, fine, and fills in that nice little chunk for me. But again, that Oscar Pettiford 7-inch is probably the coolest little piece I've found lately. The Urania stuff is really cool. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. But it's all stuff that if you see it for a good price, grab it. And the Emersy box set, from what I can tell, you need to grab that if you see it. It's a great way to dive into the artists that Mercury Emersy record and just to see how important a label Mercury and Emersy was in the 50s to jazz. They really record a lot of black musicians. They didn't really hold back or filter them very much. There's a lot of early material that kind of comes glutting out in the dawning of the LP era, so you have to kind of filter through some of that. But even the early 50s, late 40s stuff on Mercury, Emersy, it's quality black music with a lot to say, and they deserve a lot more recognition than they get. So y'all be safe. All my Patreon subscribers, thank you guys so much. Appreciate you guys. Much love. The cafe is coming together. I got the glass on my doors, and I've had a few requests to show you those up close a little bit, so let's do that. So here we are. We can unlock that baby, open up that beautiful glass door, and there we got some Savoy up top, some Riverside, some Verve, some Jubilee, some Atlantic, room to grow on the bottom. As you can see, these suckers all locking. It keeps the dust off my records. It keeps the cats from climbing up my records. And most importantly, it'll keep people from walking out with my records when the cafe opens up. There's Bethlehem up top here. Some Roost stuff right there. The Roost 10-inch stuff is in there. More Jazzland, Moodsville, Swingville. More Atlantic, Verve. This stuff all kind of goes horizontally, so there's more Verve even here. Prestige and Bluna all the way across the top. Let's just open a few more doors, Bob Bowser. Bob's like, open some doors for me. So again, there's these wonderful cabinets that my friend helped me make. Yeah, well, he made them. I just kind of told him what I wanted. He threw them together, and he probably undercharged me by the sounds of it. And there's 2 more cabinets over there for a total of 6 cabinets, each 4 feet wide by 6.5 feet tall. They're really beautiful, and I'm super proud of them. And it's a pretty special place to have my jazz collection. Of course, all my rock, pop, R&B, soul, hip-hop, reggae is all in the back room now. This is just jazz stuff. So there's about 6,000 jazz records in here. And of course, the 10 inches are still in there for the most part. I think I'm going to pull the 10 inches out eventually, put them in the shelves because these doors don't lock. So that's my collection for today. Those are the new cabinets. Y'all be safe. Have a great day. Be blessed. Peace.